Seed starting, that's me, Martha Smith. I am a horticulture educator up in the Quad Cities area. I have been starting seeds for years. In fact, just last night I started some coleus and some foxglove, and last week I started some lupin and some poppies. So it's something that I enjoy doing. It's fun to do this time of year, and especially in the unprecedented situation we're all under. Hey, start some seeds and see what you get. But what are we talking about? Well, this is a definition that I looked up, so it's more of the scientific definition. Selecting viable seeds, providing them with all the complements of their natural environment which are necessary for germination in a form or sequence which sets off the chain of events which leads to the productions of seedlings. There's a lot in there. So I really prefer this. We're going to mimic nature in order to get seeds to germinate and grow in an artificial environment. I grow in my basement. I don't have any natural sunlight. I have grow lights. So I am trying to get these seeds to germinate and to grow in this artificial space. So you might have a greenhouse or something more in tune with the natural sunlight, but it's still not the same as having them growing outdoors. So what are we going to discuss today? I'm going to talk about timing. We're going to talk about seed selection. Then there's 3 parts to this process. Talk about germination, seedling growth, and then hardening them off. Now, I always like to start with, why do you want to do this? Why start your own seeds? Well, everybody has their own reasons, but the first 2, head start in the season and earlier harvest, are pretty common. I know if I start my seeds indoors according to whatever the packet direction or seed directions I have, they will be that much more mature when I go to set them out after the chance of frost. So rather than having to plant them at that time and then wait 60 days to see the fruits of my labor, I can start them indoors 30 days earlier and have them come into bloom or whatever 30 days after I plant them. And this is also important with vegetables. Early harvest. We know that for many of us from central to northern Illinois, our growing season isn't all that long and warm enough so that we can direct seed peppers into our gardens. So we start them indoors so we have that little head start on the season. Now, years ago, there was a garden center up here in the northern part of the state, and they started what they called neighbor beater tomatoes. They would start tomatoes in their greenhouses 6, 7, 8 weeks before. And the idea was when they opened up and people came to buy their vegetable plants, they had tomato plants that already had a tomato growing on it. So you could be the first one in your neighborhood that would have a garden tomato. And they were called neighbor beater tomatoes. At first, it started off as a lark, and years later, they were selling hundreds of them. Another reason to start your own seeds is greater variety. I'm showing you a little plant here called Laurentia or star flower. Years ago, this was not a common plant to find in our garden centers. I was looking for a plant that would stay about 15 to 16 inches tall, could tolerate full sun, and I wanted it to be blue in color. Now notice, color was my 3rd selection. So many times we pick a plant for its color before we think think about what is it going to do where we want to plant it. So I found these seeds, Laurentia worked fine. I now see this more in the garden centers, and it also comes in a pink and a white. Cost savings, you'll notice I have a question mark. As with many hobbies, you can do it on a shoestring, or there are a lot of bells and whistles. So you decide. I tend to be more on the shoestring budget side. And the last two, satisfaction and enjoyment. I enjoy the process. I enjoy seeing these seedlings emerge and grow. And then having them out in the garden and someone asks, where did you get those? And I just say, oh, I started them from seed. Or if I have extras left over, I can share them with friends. But before you start, I want you to ask yourself some questions. Am I willing to devote time to this process? Do I have enough space to do this correctly? And am I ready? Do I have all of my supplies? So do you have the time? Annuals are grouped in 3 general categories based on the time needed indoors before setting them out. A seed packet might say start indoors a minimum 8 to 12 weeks before last chance of frost, or 6 to 8 weeks, or 4 to 6 weeks. Because once you start these, you really need to be there to pay attention. That's why I think this year is perfect. You know, some of us normally might be off visiting family members this time of year. Well, if you're home, you've got the time, you might as well start them because they're going to need your attention through May. Do you have enough space? I'm going to talk about using seed starting trays and plugs, and then you transplant seedlings up to the final containers. So my seed tray or my plug tray, that might only take up maybe, you know, an 8 by 12 inch spot. And I might have 50 seedlings in there. They can't stay in there. I'm going to have to bump them up to a larger container. So now my grow space becomes critical because I go from this small seed tray to plug tray to a full flat. And for me, that's important because I don't have unlimited space. Is everything ready? Your best defense against problems is going to be sanitation. Take the time. Make sure your grow area is clean. Make sure you're using clean materials. If you're using containers that you used before, wash them out, air dry them, and then I dip them in a 10% bleach solution because you're in this artificial environment and there are things that can come in, and more than likely it's going to come in on unclean material. Okay, so make sure you're using everything clean. Don't reuse seed starting mix. When I go to fill my seed trays and plug trays with seed starting mix, I wet up what I think I'm going to need. I fill my containers, and if I have any left over, it doesn't go back in the bag. It goes to my compost pile. What I don't use, I'll seal up and I'll store it for next year, but I don't want to take the chances of any type of cross-contamination. I wipe down my tables, I sweep. Then I want to make sure I have all my supplies. I order my seeds early. I hate getting that little notice in the mail or email saying sold out. I want to make sure I have all my media ready, my containers are ready, and since I grow in a completely artificial environment, I want my lights to be ready, and I want to have some spare bulbs, light bulbs, in case one of them goes out, and then I go to order it, and they might not be able to ship for a couple weeks. So we're ready to begin. So when is it safe to plant most bedding plants where you live? When do you start your seeds? Pick the date that you want to be able to set them out, and then count backwards from that date. So I'm always looking at about May 20th. I'm up in northern Illinois. So that's my final date. So I start counting back and I set my calendar. So we have people from across the state, across the country listening in today. So when is the average date of your last spring frost? And I'm just going to share with you all Illinois information. In southern Illinois, your average date of last frost is April 5th. Central, it's April 15th, and northern, it's April 25th. Now, that's the average. You still have 50% chance of getting a frost. So we add, about 10 days onto it, just to give us a little buffer. So for those of you in southern Illinois, probably somewhere around the last week in April. I've up here in northern Illinois, mine has always been Mother's Day and afterwards. That's when we are fairly confident we're not going to get another frost. So May 15th for me, I order my seeds early. I figure out when I need to start them all. I get my planting dates and I set my planting schedule. I don't drive myself crazy and say, oh, you have to be planted on March 3rd, you have to be planted on March 7th. I try to schedule them the 1st of the month and the 15th of the month. Because remember, once you start, they're going to need your attention. So where can you find this information? Well, this is a little zinnia I grew many years ago called Thumbelina Mix, and it says right on the back of the packet, sow in ordinary garden soil, sunny area, tells you how deep, how far to make the rows for the spacing. It's all on there. But there's other information. Here it says start indoors 5 to 7 weeks before outdoor planting time. Now, if I was growing Thumbelina mixed for the first time, I would probably start them 6 weeks ahead and take notes. Now, the other thing on your seeds is put a date. You can see this is an old slide that I've used. These seeds were packed for 1996. In 1996, I could anticipate the highest percentage of germination. That's when those seeds were most viable. So if your seeds, when you get them, don't have a date, I always write it on. Some seeds will keep their viability for a long time. Others lose it very quickly. And it really depends on if you're saving them, how you're storing them. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, this was a plant that I started growing. This was probably, going back into about 2001 or 2. This is Sayonara cardunculus. This is cardoon or artichoke. And if you've ever grown this plant, it gets very big, silver foliage. I really grow it for the architectural accent. I really don't want it to set flower and try to fruit. One of mine did one year, and it took so much energy away from the foliage, the plant actually looked ratty. So this was a hard plant to find many years ago. So I went online and I was finding some information. And it says here under sowing instructions, okay, you want it to be warm. It tells you how deep. But I want you to look at sowing time right here. It says sowing time, February to March. The seed can also be sown outdoors where it is to flower in mid-spring. Well, I looked at that and didn't believe it, so did some more research, and sure enough, I hope you can see up here the hardiness rating. This plant is hardy for the southern part of our country. So if something doesn't sound right, do your research. I couldn't put these seeds out February and March up here in the Quad City area. They wouldn't make it. I had to start them indoors. So always do your research. And this is the plant. This was in 2003. This is getting toward the end of the season. I hope you can see my pointer because back here, my northern sea oats have turned brown. That indicates to me that we're getting into late September into October. And it's a very large plant. On the left, you see my bird bath, and that's how large the plant gets. I've started to see this more readily available in garden centers. So let's start with the seed. Remember your space, okay? I have very limited space to grow. When I'm purchasing, I want to have good seed. I choose my desired characteristics. I purchase what I need. Plus, I always want to have a little bit of buffer just in case something happens. I'm showing you a little picture here of Gazania. I was looking for a plant that would grow about 15 to 16 inches tall. It had to be tough. It had to be able to take some hot sun, and I wanted it to match the colors of my house. So again, color selection was my last criteria. I was more interested in getting something that would do well in the spot where I wanted to put it. I know across the front of my house, I would need 24. They came 20 per package, so I would always order 2 packages. I'd order early, and I would start my seeds on schedule. So let's talk about seeds. Viability. Viability is the germination capability. That's why I always like to put a seed date on the seed packet. And then I want to store them properly. You want to store them cool, dry, dark, and pest proof so that mice or other little critters can't get into them. Because if they're improperly stored, they're going to lose their germination capability. So you're sitting there thinking, where are my seeds? Well, they were out in the shed last August and it got up to 110 and then got down to about -5 in January. Those aren't good temperatures. Those are the type of temperatures that the seeds are going to lose their viability. And as I said, some seeds can keep their viability for many, many, many years, and some lose them really quickly. Saved seeds. You want to, as I said, store them cool, dark, dry in a pest-proof location. And then I wanted to address collected seed. We go and buy that seed for the coming year, and you're going to notice it might say it's a hybrid, or you might notice a little term or little signal saying F1. Okay, F1, best way to understand it is I always think of it as first generation. Breeders know when they take parent X and parent Y, by all the breeding and research they've done, when they cross and it produces a seed, a desired characteristic is going to show through. One of those plants that I always use as an example is Larkspur. Larkspur, member of the Delphinium aconitum group, has the very nice deep, deep, deep blue flowers, which is what most people grow it for, has somewhat lacy foliage. So you buy those seeds and it says that it's a hybrid, it's an F1. You plant them out, they're beautiful. They're nice and blue, they're exactly what you wanted. Well, then the next year you start to see some coming up from seed. Whoa, that's pretty good. But the next year you start to see more pink and you start to see maybe some dirty white. And by 3, 4 years, 5 years down the road, you're no longer seeing any blue. So that really gets us into genetics because that blue is a recessive trait. And when the two plants are crossed under controlled pollination, you get that desired trait. But once they're out in your garden, they're open to open pollination and everybody's crossing with everybody else. and the dominant traits start to come through, and the recessive traits get pushed back. So if you've collected seed, people always tell me about zinnia. Oh, I started out with yellows and orange, and now I notice all I have are the reds. Well, that tells me that whatever seed they started with, those colors were not the dominant traits. So that F1 does give you a good clue that you're going to get the desired characteristics that season. But it's not always color. They breed plants for a number of things. Here I'm showing you Digitalis purpurea excelsior hybrid mixed. The hybrid part of that is not flower color. The hybrid part is the flower stalk is stronger, it's stouter, so it can withhold strong winds. Zinnia elegans parasol mixed F1. You can see it's not color because you're getting a multitude of colors, but that first year you can anticipate a small mounded plant covered with these, about the size of a quarter zinnia flowers. So you save those seeds for next year, and maybe 25% of them are 2.5 feet tall, or 25% of them don't have that little tight little flower. They have more of that flat-topped zinnia flower. Okay, so it's not color. It could be a hybrid for a number of things. Now, since we're talking about seeds, we have to talk about dormancy. Now, dormancy, I always think of it as a survival mechanism for the seed. The seed has to experience something, maybe time or a certain treatment, in order for them to mature and be able to germinate. Now, in the fall, let's look at some of our seeds that drop. Let's look at purple coneflower. Purple coneflower seeds drop, but they don't germinate then. They're not going to germinate till next spring. Because if they germinated right then when they dropped in October, late September, they'd come up, they'd be very tender, and they would not survive our cold winters. So a lot of times it's something that the plant needs to extend its time before it's going to germinate. Now there's different types, and I'm just giving you a very simplified version of this today. Some of them, the embryo is just immature, so it just needs some time, and that could be through winter. Okay. Sometimes the seed coat is very hard, it's impermeable, and you might have to pound it or nick it or scrape it. Sometimes the packet might say soak in warm water overnight. All of these are designed so that that seed coat will rupture for you. It might say a mild acid soak. So when you think about it, remember, we're mimicking what happened in nature. This could be breaking of the seed coat, could be an animal grazing on it, chewing it, or animals walking over it. Passing through the intestines of an animal would give it that mild acid soak. We have physiological. This is where certain seeds need some type of after treatment. After treatment could be a cold treatment. It could be a warm, dry treatment. There are some seeds that I've read about in Australia that need smoke as an after treatment. So there's all different types of physiological dormancies. And then there's chemical, where something in that plant just has to wear away, or chemicals have to change over in order for those seeds to germinate. Now, dormancy can be a combination of several of these. It doesn't necessarily have to be just one. But I'm going to share with you the two that most home gardeners are confronted with. First is scarification. This is where you have to break or scratch or soften the seed coat so that the water can enter and starts the germination process. This could be an acid soak, a hot water soak, nicked or scratched or pounded. Lenten rows have a very interesting dormancy cycle, and part of it is they need a warm, moist treatment. Well, warm, moist is going to be summer. And what this does is it promotes the chemical makeup of the seed coat to start to decay. And that's important because then it goes into fall and into winter, goes through the chilling, and then usually will germinate the next year. The other one is stratification, and this is a cool moist treatment. This is where you are giving them the experience of winter. You're going to put them in a moist medium and place in your refrigerator. The instructions might say place in refrigerator for 6 to 12 weeks. It might say 4 to 8 weeks. This is the minimum amount of chilling that those seeds need in order to break their dormancy. So scarification and stratification are two of the most common types of dormancy home gardens are confronted with. So let's get into starting seeds. We're going to talk about two stages, starting them. And here we're going to talk about germination, media, containers, water, temperature, and light. Under seedling growth, we're going to talk about light, media, containers, water, temperature, and fertilizer. With starting seeds, light has a question mark. Majority of seeds do not need light to germinate, but there are some that do. So if you have tried to start a seed in the past and you haven't had good luck with it, you might do your research and find out, okay, maybe I buried those too deep. Maybe they need light. Under seedling growth, we have to talk about light and we have to talk about fertilizer. Seeds starting, when the seeds first emerge, they have what are called cotyledons and they have an endosperm. They have enough of a food reserve or an energy source to get them started until the seedling can produce its own leaves to photosynthesize its own food. Once they're growing, then we need to provide them with fertilizer. So this is germination. This is a green bean seed. You plant the seed, it starts to take in moisture, gases start to form, metabolic processes take place within the seed coat ruptures, the radicle drops. This hook right here is called the hypocotyl. In this case, the hypocotyl is pulling up these cotyledons. The cotyledons are the food reserves. And that's what's going to supply the necessary food for that bean plant until it has its own leaves to photosynthesize. And if you've ever grown green beans, you see these because they dry up, wither, and fall off because they're no longer needed. Technically, right about here, germination is over, and now we're starting seedling growth. So what do we need for germination? Well, I'm going to share with you three methods. One is using a seed tray, one is direct seeding into a final container, and the other is plug trays. You've got to think about your water supply. Some type of mister over the top is fine. We're also going to talk about bottom watering, and we're going to talk about bottom heat. Now, germination media. I'm going to show you a lot of brand names on here. There's lots that are out there. Find one that you like. You want it to be fine and uniform. You want it well aerated and loose. You want it clean, sterile. It doesn't need to be high in fertility and soluble salts. In fact, some of these seeds are so fine that soluble salts and low fertilities could harm them. And you want it capable of holding moisture. So here I'm showing you a seed tray. This is nothing more than a fast food salad container. I washed it, let it air dry, dipped it in mild bleach solution, and then to the bottom I poked holes. I mean, it's really high tech. Here, I believe what I was growing that year were Nigella. So in that seed little salad tray, I probably have 50 seeds starting. Now they're not going to be able to stay in there the whole time. I'm going to bump them up to the final container, but I'll be able to select the largest and the healthiest seedlings. And because of this small use of space, I'm getting efficient germination and I'm using my germination space efficiently. Now, some seeds don't respond well to this disturbance. If on the seed packet it says direct seed into final container, that's a good indication that that particular seed does not respond well to early root disturbance. Now there's direct seeding. Direct seeding into the final container. So here I'm showing you a flat. We're not going to use a seed starting mix entirely. We're going to bring in a good potting soil, a good mix. And we're going to take the heavier potting mix. We're going to fill those cells about 80%, and then we're going to use our seed starting on the top so that we can put the seeds into that finer media. And as they germinate, the roots will penetrate into that heavier media. Now here, you don't have any root disturbance and transplant shock, but you might not get germination. If you put one seed in each of those cells, maybe every third or fifth or sixth just doesn't germinate. So you're not getting efficient use of your germinating space. So what they recommend is that you plant 2 to 3 seeds per cell, and then you're going to thin them out later. Now this is a plug tray. This is really the happy medium between both, because you're direct seeding, but then you're going to be able to pop those plugs up and bump them up to the final container. Here, I've used all three of these. The top one, 8631, that's about, I'd say 1.75 inches long. 8643, about 2.25, maybe a half. And then the one on the bottom is about 3 inches. They have holes in the bottom to allow for drainage. Now, there is a cost to these because they're very hard to clean in between use. So they're really more of a disposable once you've used them. And for some people, especially using the smaller ones, they've said that it's hard to pull them out. So just some of the things that people have shared with me. Last night when I started seeds, I started some in plug trays and I started the others in a seed tray. So here, these are those artichokes. And I'm just showing you, I seeded them into the larger of the plug trays, and now I'm getting ready to bump them up to their final container. And you can see when I pop them out, I'm not disturbing their roots. They're coming out in their entirety. Some of you may have used the Jiffy 7s. Jiffy 7s, similar to the Jiffy popcorn. Remember, you put it on the stove and it would pop up. Here, the Jiffy 7s, you add water to those discs and they expand. If you noticed in the very center of that disc, there's a little depression. And if you were to look at one closely, it's usually a lighter color. When these get water and pop up, they actually have a small reservoir of a lighter seed starting mix in the center. These are intended to be able to just stick right in the ground and the plants will do fine. I personally have used these and I've had a hard time with drying out. Maybe it's in my grow space because it's artificial if they were in a sunnier spot, but I had a hard time that season. They were staying too wet. So some of you may have had really good luck with these and others might also have experienced some problems. So what I'm going to do, if I'm doing my seed tray, if I'm doing my plug tray, I'm going to take my germinating media, that's the seed starting media. I pre-moisten it. I take what I think I'm going to use, put it in a clean bucket, get it wet, then I fill my seed or plug tray and tamp it down. I'm going to plant the seeds according to directions. Cover seed if recommended. Remember, some seeds need light. And then label and date your container. If you think you're going to remember the 4 different types of marigolds you planted, good luck with that, because they all look the same when they're young seedlings. And then cover it. If you're using an old salad container, you'll just have the clear top. Make sure that top is clean. Or you can put like a clear saran wrap over them or into a clear bag. Last night when I did my plug trays, I used just clear saran wrap, but you can't let it rest on the media. So I have it propped up with some of those little white plant stakes. So it's not directly on top of the media. And then I'm going to put it over my bottom heat source. If I'm going into that final flat, I would fill it with that final media. I would water it in, and then on the top, I would put probably about a 1/4 inch of a germinating media so that the finer the seed, they have a better chance of germinating and growing on. Now, some seed is very fine. I did the digitalis last night, and that is a fine seed. There's some tips. If you want to tap it out of the bag, you can add something to bulk it up. And what's recommended is a heaping teaspoon of a fine, clean sand. Put it into the packet, mix well, because that's just going to give it some weight. And then you can scatter that across the top of your seed tray or across the top of your plug trays. I try to do a crisscross pattern on my seed trays. I will set the seed down in one direction, rotate that seed tray, and go in a different direction. Now there are seeders that you can buy. Now we're getting into some, bells and whistles. Number 1 is a plastic trowel, and it has these little discs you put in, and the bottom of each disc has a different size opening. So you put the disc in, you put the seeds behind it, then on the handle there's that little yellow that you rotate and it jiggles it, and they're supposed to jiggle out one by one. Number 2 is the seed sucker upper, and it comes with different size nozzles, so you can have them for fine, medium, and large seeds. And I'll tell you, it looks a lot easier than it really is. So what do your seeds need? Seeds have to be able to take in water, so they have to be kept moist. Temperature, the vast majority of seeds that we're talking about, no other factor will speed up germination time more than a constant warm temperature. Now this isn't air temperature, this is going to be media temperature, okay? And as I talked about before, know your seed requirements regarding light. So water, as I pre-moisten my media, my germination media, and then I plant, and then I usually will just do a fine mist over the top. But once they're growing, I really like to do bottom watering because it keeps the foliage dry. Again, I'm in an artificial environment. I don't want to bring in any conditions that would be favorable for diseases. So you're going to take a clean container with clean water, fill it about an inch, and then set your container in there. It's going to be soaked up through the drainage holes. I take it off. I usually will set the tray kind of on the edge of the sink to allow the excess to drain away. Now people say, how long? Well, I do it by weight. I also do it by color. A wet media generally is going to be darker. Also, when we get to fertilizing, you can also mix your blue water fertilizers such as your Schultz, your Miracle-Gro, your Peters into that water and let it be absorbed through the bottom. As I said, generally seed germinate better if their soil temperature is warmer than the surrounding air. I use a germinating mat. We used to recommend the top of our water heaters, because remember back when that was a nice constant warm temperature, but now we insulate our water heaters, so there's no longer that constant source of heat. Or people have told me they would put them on top of their refrigerators because when they kicked on, there would be some heat that would come up there. But again, our refrigerators are so efficient. We recommend a germinating mat. Now, I have to just throw this out there. You only use products labeled for use as a germinating mat. People call and they have all sorts of creative ideas of what they want to use for bottom heat, but if it is not a labeled use, legally, University of Illinois Extension cannot recommend it. So here, oh, I should go back. Number one is designed so you can put your tray immediately atop the mat. Number two is one that has a grid over it. So whichever one you get, follow the instructions. There's commercial grade up also, that's what I'm showing you there. And if you really, really want to know what your temperature is, you can buy a thermostat. I don't use a thermostat. I have them on my germinating tray. I know that they're warm because I'm getting condensation on the inside of that container. I can't tell you if it's 67 degrees or 69 degrees. All I know is it's warmer, and I can get seeds like zinnias, marigolds. They'll be popping in 36 hours. Know your seed. Most seeds will not require light, but if you've had trouble growing any of these, do your research because these need light. I started some poppies. It just said a very fine, fine dusting over the top. So when is germination over? Well, how many do you need? Here, I'm showing you the Nigella again. I know how many I needed for that season. I wait till I appears I have a good selection to choose from with a buffer of maybe 10 to 20% more, just in case some of them don't make it. I'm going to remove the cover. I take them off the heat source. I'm going to place them under my grow lights, and now the seedling growth stage begins. So with seedling growth, we have to talk about light, media, containers, water, temperature, and fertilizer. We have to talk about light. Seedlings need bright light. Different parts of the light spectrum influence different stages of growth. The blue end of the spectrum is going to affect the early stages of vegetative growth, while the red-orange end of the spectrum is going to help with the later stages of growth, fruiting, and flowering. So the types of light bulbs that are out there, probably the most popular are going to be the fluorescent. Then I'm going to share with you high intensity discharge, the HIDs, and then I've done some experimenting with LEDs. I am in no way a lighting expert. This is just what I've researched and learned over the years. Not only is the lighting important, the duration is important. So I set my lights on timers. If my lights are new and they're at their most efficient, I might set my timers for 14 hours. If I've used them for a couple growth cycles and feel they might be losing some efficiency, I might set them for a little longer, maybe 15.5 hours. So let's talk fluorescent. It's the most commonly available. So we have grow lights. What a grow light is the inside of that fluorescent tube is coated to give off the blue end of the spectrum and the red-orange end of the spectrum. That's what a grow light is, getting those two ends of the spectrum that are going to benefit the plant. Now, you can buy grow lights, sure, or you can do a combination of cool white fluorescence and warm white fluorescence. The picture I'm showing you at the bottom, in the center, you have what they consider white. To the right, there's more blue. That's the cool white. Sometimes people consider it a harsher, brighter light. And to the left is what we call the warm white. And you can see it has more of that yellow glow to it. So in my basement, I have a 4-foot ballast. I can put four 4-foot fluorescent tubes, and I run 2 cool white and 2 warm white. I also date my fluorescent tubes, and I will use them for 2 growing cycles. They start to lose their efficiency. They start to get dark on the ends, and that becomes important with my grow space, and I'll explain that in a minute. Now, there's also the compact fluorescent bulbs also. Here's just some examples of just some hanging fixtures. You can see in the bottom they have it set on a timer. With your fluorescent lights, you want to keep them 1 to 2 inches away. This is probably the most common mistake people make. They put the lights too far away and the plants will stretch. You want them immediately below that light. So that 4-foot ballast I have, my grow space is immediately under it. So if my lights are starting to lose efficiency and darken on the ends, I'm going to compromise those plants that are on the very end. So that's why I only use them for 2 growing cycles. Now the bulbs are perfectly fine. You can use them upstairs in your light fixtures. It's just I use only for 2 seasons. Now in this picture, that container in the front, as those seeds are emerging, they would have to lift that up closer to that light. Here, the same thing, the compact high output system. Personally, I have never used it, but it would follow the same guidelines. As my plants grow, I'm lifting my lights. So here you can buy some pulley systems. Yeah, I just use old chain fence and some S-hooks and do it manually. Now it can get a little challenging, especially when you're growing a variety of things. So this is my germinating mat, which is turned off. And this is my small grow light. And so I'm starting to tilt the light. I probably brought in some bricks or something to put them underneath those shorter ones to get them closer. So sometimes you have to get pretty creative when you're growing different things. If you're just growing one thing, it's pretty easy. Here are some fluorescent light systems. These are slick. I mean, they've got their watering tray. They can be adjustable, but you know, you're getting into $300, $400, $500. HID is high intensity discharge. HID will mimic your natural sunlight the best. Picture number 2 is my grow room. That's my space. I have an HID. It is, I want to say 300 watts. And when I got the light, it said I could put that light 3 feet above the top of my plants. So this gives me a wider, larger grow space. So the HID, you don't have to have it immediately over the top of the plants. I can also tell you by the color of the light, I'm pushing the red-orange end of the spectrum, so I'm getting toward the end of the cycle. These are the light bulbs. The blue end is going to be your metal halide. Your red end is your high pressure sodium. And depending on the manufacturer, depending on the company, these can be rather large. I've used my HID lights for 5, 6, 7 years. for me, I was not noticing any lack of efficiency. Now, when you buy them, you're going to get a hood, you're going to get the sockets, the lights, and you're going to get the ballast and a cord. What I'm showing you here is when I bought mine, I can only run one light bulb at a time. So I have to manually take out that blue and physically put in the red orange. This is slick because you can run them both at the same time and offer both ends of the light spectrum. And then we have LEDs. This is an LED Glow Panel 45. This is one of the first ones I bought. I was at the Mid-Am Trade Show, and I bought one when they were just first coming out. When I purchased this one, it said that I could hang it 10 to 24 inches above the plant, so I chose 17 inches. This gave me a larger grow space than my fluorescent, approximately 5 square feet. It said do not exceed 18 hours a day, and it does use a lot less power than my HID light. As you can see, what end of the color spectrum are they pushing? The blue and the red. Okay. You can use this as a standalone or use with other grow lights. When they first came out, they said 50,000 hour lifespan. Mine didn't last that long, but they're only 45 watts. So it is more energy efficient. Now, when I was using these, all the plants looked off color. And I would have to physically turn the light off in order to see the health of my plants. And I found out that they were anemic. So with these lights, the new ones they have coming out, you can adjust how much clear light you want and how much red and how much blue, which I think is pretty neat. But they also came out with some glass sunglasses. So you put them on and it takes off that blue-purple light so you can see the plants. And currently right now, my system, I'm using a combination of fluorescents and LEDs. So back to our seedlings. Remember, whatever system you're using, keep that distance, set them on timers. Now in my grow space, I have a fan. I don't have it blowing on the plants, but I have it circulating air because I want to keep disease problems to a minimum. So I don't want moisture to build up. And I'm adjusting my lights as the plants grow. Temperature, air temperature, try to keep your grow room under 68 degrees if you can. I'll explain that when we get to pests. Keep them moist but not wet and bottom water. And you got to talk about fertilizer. I recommend starting out with a half-strength fertilizer. That is, if it says a tablespoon of a blue water fertilizer, such as Miracle-Gro, Schultz, or Peters, I put a half. And I bottom water, and I do this about every third watering. Now, going back to our transplants from the seed and plug trays, they can't stay in there. When they're getting their second and third set of true leaves, they have to be bumped up. So here, what was I growing that year? Bachelor buttons. So you can see I'm going from that small seed tray into those final containers. And that's where my grow space becomes very critical. And I can tell you this picture was taken about 15 years ago, and we no longer have that lovely carpet. Going back to the Nigella, I had 50 seedlings. I think I needed about 20. So, and I figured I had enough to health pick out the largest and the healthiest. I could transplant them. Here, what I'm showing you is the ones I popped out of the plugs and the ones that I moistened the media and gently pulled them apart. So what I'm looking for from the seed tray is I'm looking for a good top to root balance. I'm not going to plant this one. Okay, I know we're gardeners. We want to save every single plant, but I don't have the space. So you can see plugs, they're not going through that transplant shock. Whatever container you choose, just make sure that it's clean and adequate size. Now, when we bump them up to the final container, use a good quality potting mix. You want it to be clean. People always ask me about the added fertilizers. I kind of like them because then I don't have to mess with the blue water fertilizers. I just take that out of the plan. What I don't like are the water absorbing polymers. If the bag says extend time between watering, don't water, for 2 weeks, more than likely it has the polymer. Those are those super slurpers, the ones that expand to 400 times their volume and help maintain moisture in the media. I tried those 1 year, and again, I had problems with it drying out, especially again in my artificial environment. Now, if it says wetting agent, a wetting agent is completely different. A wetting agent is where parts of that media have been treated so that they can readily absorb water. Sphagnum peat moss, when it gets bone dry, doesn't absorb water readily, so it may get treated with a wetting agent. So I'm just going to fill my containers. I'm going to separate my seedlings or pop them out of the plug tray, poke a hole in the media, place the seedling, and firm the soil. Now, people ask, do you pick them up by the roots? Do you pick them up by the stems? If you're a grower and you're doing 1,000 of these, you're picking them up gently. So whatever works for you. So we're going to keep our grow room, try to moderate our temperatures below 68. Monitor the moisture. We're going to fertilize if not in the mix. And as you get closer to setting them up, you can bump up to a full strength blue water fertilizer. And I'm adjusting my lights. Now remember when we direct seeded into that final flat and it said plant 2-3 seeds. Well, you can't let them all grow. They're going to crowd each other out. And you don't want to pull out the ones you don't want. So you just take some fine nose scissors and just cut out the ones you don't want, but cut them below the soil line. So you're getting below that stem tissue and into the root tissue and sever them there. So problems. Yes, we can have some problems. Damping off, fungus, gnat, shore flies, and we're going to talk about all of these. Okay, damping off. This is a water mold. Fungi and water molds cause a disease that kill young seedlings. Maybe you've started seeds and you've had them up in your living, maybe you keep at 68 to 70 degrees, and they're chugging along, they're just doing fantastic. You come down one morning and they're all falling over and there's a white fuzz on them. You've been hit by one of the water molds. As I said, your best defense is clean conditions. The other is keep your growing temperatures below 68. These water molds really proliferate at temperatures higher. My grow room actually can be a little bit too cool, 61 to 62, so I've never had really any problems. Now, yes, you can buy chemicals to counteract this, but if you're growing a small amount, you might have to buy a pint and only need a teaspoon. So clean growing conditions, cool room, and encourage that flow. So far, knock on wood, I've been able to stay disease-free. Shore flies and fungus gnats. Yeah, we have these. Shore flies are just bumbling little black flies that really are more of a nuisance than anything else. Yes, they leave little black fecal spots on the foliage, but that's really the only damage. Fungus gnats, on the other hand, the adults lay their eggs in the media and the larvae can feed on their roots. Now, where do these come from? Well, unfortunately, in the trade, we know that we have some contaminated media. But a lot of times when people have a grow light or a greenhouse, they're bringing in plants that they want to overwinter, and they're setting them next to these little brand new seedlings, and you're just getting cross-contamination. I have a different set of grow lights out in my shed for anything that I'm overwintering, and I don't keep anything in my grow room because I don't want to have to deal with these. Shore flies breed in overwatered conditions with algae, so keep your room dry. They're primarily a nuisance. Fungus gnats also like algae, so again, try to keep your grow area dry. And root feeding can cause direct damage and can allow diseases to enter. So avoid overwatering, have good airflow. Go into my grow room and I see half a dozen to a dozen, I don't get too worried. But if I see a black cloud, yeah, then I'm going to get worried. I've used the yellow sticky traps, especially for the fungus gnats, so that the adults get stuck on there and they can't lay their eggs. And there's also a BT, Bacillus thuringiensis, treatment to control the larvae in the media. Other problems, tall spindly plants, well, maybe they're stretching, they're too far from the light. Growth is really slow, well, maybe your grow room is too cool, or maybe you need to bump up your fertilizer. Chlorosis, that's where you start to see the off color, you start to see the tissue between the veins starting to yellow. Maybe your lights are no longer efficient. Maybe you need to bump up your fertilizer. So now we're getting ready to set them out. We just can't take them from our grow space and throw them outdoors. We have to go through this process of hardening off. And it's this process altering the quality of plant growth environment so that they can go from the indoors to the outdoors. And it's called hardening off because what we do is you grow them leaner and meaner. Um, and as you do this, the tissues in the stems actually stiffen up. Okay, so that's where we get the term hardening off. Um, if you can, grow them a little cooler. Let them dry out. Uh, bring them up to a sunnier spot. Just start to do some type of acclimation so that they'll be fine outdoors. If you can grow them cooler, I know a lot of greenhouse growers that start leaving their vents open at night so that they're growing them cooler. Grow them a little drier. Maybe you can move them up to an unheated sunroom. And if it's really going to get cold, you can bring them back in. A cold frame outdoors is fine. Just regulate your opening and closing because you can get, if you don't open it and it's a sunny day, it can get pretty warm in there. And then the other is acclimate them to the natural sunlight. Take them outdoors, maybe put them under the tree for the first day. And if they're a full sun plant, just gradually expose them to more and more sunlight. This is the east side of my sunroom. This is where I like to harden off. They get morning sun, afternoon shade. And if it does get cold, I can just slip them right back into the sunroom. So plant and enjoy. I always encourage people, try something. If you've never done this before, try zinnias and marigolds. They're easy. Here I'm just sharing with you some things that I've tried. Zinnia angustifolia, crystal white, nice little zinnia, doesn't get very tall, covered with these nice white flowers with the yellow centers. In the center is that Gazania, the Gazania Daybreak Tiger Mix. That's the one that I planted in front of my house. And then I've tried the Tithonia rotundifolia, Fiesta del Sol. Tithonia is Mexican sunflower. The straight species can get upwards of 5 feet tall. Fiesta del Sol usually stays about 3.5 feet. And this is a pollinator butterfly magnet when it gets into July and August. Some references, you have all of these. The one on the bottom, From Seed to Bloom, Eileen Powell, I've had that book for years, and I always find it very, very helpful. I don't know if it's updated. I still think I have the original. So that's the program.